America has a huge drug problem, but the Obama administration now wants to end what's been called the war on drugs and start treating this as a public health matter. I sat down with the current drug czar, Gil Kerlikowske. He's director of the Office of National Drug Policy, and with CNN contributor Bill Bennett. He was the first drug czar back in the George H.W. Bush administration. Does the change in focus suggest the government is open to legalizing marijuana?
No, legalization is an absolute non-starter in the Obama administration, and it just makes no sense. But what we do know is that there are a lot of people frustrated about the war on drugs. They don't see success. They know friends, they know relatives, they know what's happened in their own neighborhoods. We're going to bring some other people into this issue at the same level that we have law enforcement. That's where we're headed.
Because the argument in favor of legalizing marijuana is sort of this. We legalized alcohol, we regulate it, people deal with it. Why not do the same thing with marijuana, and as a result open up efforts to deal with much more serious drug-related issues like heroin, for example?
You know, as a police chief for a long time, I never saw officers in Seattle running around spending an inordinate amount of time chasing people for a small amount of marijuana. We know that the health costs of alcohol, the health costs of nicotine versus the taxes collected doesn't even begin to pay for those social and criminal justice costs. Why have another mood-altering drug made legal and then more widely available because of its legality?
Well, would you want to criminalize alcoholic use?
No, I'm not going back down that path, but I don't think that we need another thing that causes so much hurt to families and people.
Is this a waste of resources, though, to spend so much law enforcement, judicial effort, criminalizing people who want to go out and smoke pot?
No, we had 40,000 people die last year because of drug use. We could make that 80,000 or 120 or 360,000 by making it legal. You make it legal, you make it more accessible, you get permission for it. Alcohol is legal. We have plenty of alcoholics. We have plenty of people whose lives are wrecked, plenty of families whose lives are wrecked because of alcohol.
Because there's one argument that alcohol is potentially a lot more dangerous than marijuana.
It may be. I think if you really examine the arguments, you might want to think about more restrictions on alcohol than opening up marijuana. When you see the effect of marijuana on the brain, particularly the young brain.
You don't want to go back to prohibition.
I don't want to go back to prohibition, but I certainly think the rules on drinking, if they were enforced, for example, on college campuses, where we know what this leads to from time to time, leads to a lot of things every weekend, but some weekends it leads to some of the horrible violence we've seen. But let me just say a word about the war on drugs, properly understood, not to get into a war with Gil Kerlikowske about the phrase. But if you energize people, motivate people, if you talk about this issue, as Gil Kerlikowske has and will, I don't think the president has enough at all, and I think he should, you can have success. Remember, in 1979, there were about 24 million drug users in this country. This country decided to do something about it. There was a drug czar appointed. The country mobilized. The number in 1992 was 11 million. That's not victory, but from 24 million to 11 million is a big decline. It's now back up to 20 million. Now, I think if you press right on this thing, don't fall for the siren song of legalization, and I applaud the drug czar on that, and going out to California and fighting this issue, you can get those numbers back down, and that's what you want. You want the numbers down, not up.
Let me pick up with one point that Bill just made. In your mind, and you're an authority on this, is alcohol potentially more dangerous than pot?
2 points. One, alcohol does cause more problems than marijuana, but alcohol is legal. If you make marijuana legal, it will therefore become much more widely available, and therefore the damages and detriment to society and to individuals would continue to increase. But let me mention also, President Obama is actively engaged in this. When I met with him and he gave me some directions to get the voice of the American people into this strategy, that's what's in there. When I briefed him a week ago about the strategy, he could not be more supportive.
How do we reduce the demand for illegal drugs in the United States?
Smart education through a variety of trusted givers.
Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no.
She did. And you know, it's a little more complex than that. If parents, teachers, faith community, and neighborhood groups all give young people the same consistent message, and they repeat it, about making healthy choices. Underage drinking is mentioned in the strategy, the drug problems, and of course, if they get healthy choice advice about exercise, nutrition, they will actually be prevented in the future.
Hearing this for decades now.
Well, we've only kept it to 4 hours in a healthcare class about drugs and maybe 4 hours about nicotine. It has to be across the whole continuum.
I remember when I was a little boy growing up in Buffalo, New York, I heard all those stories, the horrors of drugs, and we were taught that, and I assume since then all the kids are taught about
One, we
that.
don't want to use scare tactics, and number two, we want to use the evidence-based systems, and that's what the most recent analysis tells us. Across the board, quality advisors giving kids the right piece of information.
Is this going to make a dent?
It does, if you do it. I agree again, across the board. And Nancy Reagan's statements were underrated. A lot of the kids liked those statements. They liked because it was clear. Just say no. It's a heck of a lot better statement than if it feels good, do it. It's a lot clearer. You want that statement, but you also want sound education programs and sound policies in the schools. Problem is, kids get a message of ambiguity from adults, and when you have this legalization stupidity out there, you're going to have more young people confused.
Other than you don't like that you're not hearing enough directly from the president on this issue, is there any basic problem you have with the Obama administration's efforts to deal with this issue?
Not really. Again, I'd like more attention, more publicity. There are a lot of things going on. We understand what competes for attention. But this strategy, if people read it, I think would be very impressive. It's a clear moral message, and it talks about working on a variety of fronts. I think it's quite good. But what you had back in the 80s was an entire society mobilized, and this is what leadership does. You did have all those ads. The guy jumping off the diving board into an empty swimming pool. This is your brain on drugs. This is the 2 fried eggs. Because the society decided it wanted to push back.
Those public service,
it pushed back, it went down, and we can do that again.
They're coming up.
The president asked for $66 million in those advertisements, and those advertisements are directed towards specific groups. In fact, just last week we released the strategies for meth on reservations in tribal nations for those kids. Those are targeted directly to that youth group, and we're going to continue to do those things.
Gil Kirilkowski, thanks very much for coming in. Bill Bennett, thanks for this discussion. Let's hope you make a dent. We're counting on you.
Good. Thank you.